Great. So good evening to members, officers, guests and members of the public watching on YouTube. Welcome to the first meeting of the Children's Mental Health, Wellbeing and Resilience Scrutiny panel. I'd like to especially welcome Flora Wilkie from the Local Government Association, who will be presenting to us later, and the education co-optees Josephine Spencer and Dr. Marianne Eisen, who are joining us. Turning to the agenda, we'll begin with item 1, apologies for absence. I have apologies for lateness from Councillor Burke and apologies for possibly needing to leave early from Councillor Ahmed, and apologies for absence from the other education co-optees, Kate Roskell, Carrie-Ann Botha and Marion McNeil, and from Council Officers Carolyn Fair and Charles Barnard. Item 2, urgent matters, there are none. Item 3, matters to be considered in private, there are none. As this is a public meeting, I would remind members at this stage to avoid giving any examples in the course of questions that could identify specific children. And item 4, declarations of interest. Could members raise their Zoom hands if they have a declaration of interest? I can't see any, so there are none. So now we move to item 5, panel operations. Hopefully we can get through this quite quickly. Can I hand over to Harjeet Baines, the scrutiny officer, to take us through this, please?
Good evening. So we've got the panel's terms of reference appended to the report as Appendix 1. And we were seeking co-option from a parent whose child has been through the system and for a young person to be co-opted onto this panel. But regrettably, we've not been successful so far, but the service officers are continuing to do that, and we're hoping that we may have someone in place for the next meeting. And also appended to the report is the panel's outline work program, which was circulated earlier to the panel for comments, but Councillor Linda Burke has got some additional comments which were included in the briefing note to the panel members. So she has suggested some witnesses to be invited to that meeting. So she has suggested that we could meet with some more young people, for example, the representatives of the students' unions at the University of West London and the West London College. She's also suggesting that we invite representatives of the Royal College of Pediatrics and the Royal College of Nursing. And she feels that there ought to be a representative of early years from the University of the West London at that meeting as well. And she has felt that there ought to be greater emphasis on physical health as it's closely linked to mental health. So Councillor Burke will be joining the meeting a bit later because she's got a ward for a meeting at the same time as this one.
Yeah, so what do members think about those suggestions from Councillor Burke? It certainly seems to me that having a representative of a students' union at the next meeting would be a very good idea. But do any other members have any comments for or against those suggestions? I'm not seeing any hands up. So if we can move to agreeing the terms of reference, do you agree the terms of reference as they're set out here?
Agreed.
Agreed. Agreed.
Carlo, was that to speak or to agree?
Just agree. I was just agreeing.
Great. Okay. Brilliant. Good. So that they're agreed.
Sorry, Chair. I raised my hand. I did want to just ask one question.
Yes.
No. I just something that occurred to me when looking at the scope of the terms of reference, and what we talked about was, or what the document talked about was looking at the range that we're looking at is from early years, preschool years, all the way up to university students, and that strikes me that's a really it's effectively a whole lifetime for a young person, isn't it? So it just seems to me, I'm just wondering, do we need to be aware, or perhaps we need to be aware of that? And it seems to me that some recommendations that we come up with may be suitable for early school children, but completely inappropriate later on for university students and so on. So I was just wondering, I just raised that as an issue, possibly.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very good point that it is a very wide range. So the meeting today, we're concerning ourselves from early years up to secondary school, and it's the future meeting that would be looking more at the college and university aged young people. So we're splitting them up to that extent, but absolutely agree that we need to be very careful with the recommendations.
That seems sensible.
We're clear. Yeah, good. Okay, thank you for that. So we'd agreed in terms of reference. In terms of the work programme, I mean, so I would agree to add in representatives of students' unions into the next meeting. With that addition, do we all agree the work programme?
Agreed.
Great.
Agreed.
Great, thank you. Great, so now we're going to move on to the meat of the meeting, which is item 6, the main report that we have in front of us, and we'll be having 2 PowerPoint presentations. So the second one will be the non-eating specific one from the LGA. But first, can we have the presentation from, well, Karen Gibson will be presenting it, but other service officers are also present. So Karen, can we go over to you for the presentation, and then can I ask members to hold their questions until after the presentation, and we'll take the questions afterwards. Thank you.
Can I ask can you see that okay?
Yes, I can see that.
Awesome. Okay. Hello everyone. My name's Karen Gibson and I am the Health Improvement Manager, and I work in the Ealing Learning Partnership with a group of staff who work predominantly with schools, and we have been working alongside lots of other services recently, focusing very much on the mental health and well-being of children and young people in Ealing. And so I've been invited to put together a report, which I hope you've had the chance to have a read of, which culminates in lots of work from across the borough, from those of us that work in the local authority, as well as health and social care, as well as parents, and it's influenced as well by those in school. So I'm going to run through a series of slides, and I hope this works. I'm not 100% sure. Resume slideshow. Okay, my screen that I've got isn't letting me move my slides. So Haji, you haven't got any top tips, have you? Okay, hang on a sec. Maybe if I just press, there we go. Okay, get rid of the mouse. I am going to start really by setting the scene and telling you a bit about what we know about the data around children and young people's mental health and well-being, and also a little bit about the sort of impact of that on children and young people's health and well-being more generally. So I'm struggling slightly because I've got 2 screens open. Okay, so I'm going to start. Apologies, I don't know what's going on.
So we can see that second slide. So it is working.
Yeah, that's really weird. Every time I press enter, I've just got a new slide coming up on my system. Let me just stop sharing a second. I'm really sorry. I'm not familiar with Zoom. I tend to use Microsoft Teams in work. So how do I stop sharing the screen now? Is that something that's easy to do? I can't see on my screen where to do that.
So at the bottom of the screen where you started sharing it, right at the bottom line, does it say you can stop sharing there?
No, because I've just got you as a little box on the side, which is really bizarre. Can someone take control of it? Harjit, are you able to take control of it from me?
You change the view in the top right. If you
yeah,
go to a different view, go to exit full screen maybe, or something.
I do not know what to do. Oh, this is really frustrating. I'm really sorry.
Okay. So does Harjit have a copy of the?
Yeah, she does.
So right, let's see if we can.
I don't know why I've lost the you know, the icons at the bottom where it said to share the screen. Oh, hang on, maybe if I hang on, it's because I've got a split screen. Apologies everybody, I know you're probably hearing me flap around. So stop sharing. Right,
that's great. Yes. So
right, try again.
There's the presentation. That might be the easiest, and then just
right, share screen.
Next slide, please, in Chris Whitty style.
Let me just see if I can do this. Okay, what if
okay, so we can see that the second slide.
Same slide. Okay, yeah. Just bear with then. I'm gonna sec. Come on. No, it's not working. Is Harjit there?
Flag button.
So I think the best bet is if Harjit.
Yeah, if she can share it for me, that would be great.
Yes, I can do that, but I'm also expected to take the minutes of the meeting.
Oh
so
gosh,
I've
blimey,
got that problem as well.
Okay, maybe I can. Oh gosh.
I mean, as I said, I said anyway for the questions to be asked afterwards. So so really, you'll have the content of the slides. So
share the screen.
Probably will be okay. I think it'll be okay with Harjit showing it until the presentation finishes.
Is that you, Julie?
Yeah, I was just about to say, if Harjit can just send the slides to me, Julie Lewis, and then I will try and share them. And then in the meantime, I think, Karen, if you actually just talk through your presentation,
yeah,
I think that's the best way to
whilst you're trying to sort out the technology.
Yeah.
Okay.
Please.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Thank you, Julie.
That's fine.
The voice of reason. Very good.
Okay, Karen. So you just start verbally. That's fine.
Okay, so I was talking about what do we know. Clearly, I don't know how to use Zoom. So in terms of mental health and well-being across sort of nationally, we've got a picture of increasing incidence of mental health, ill health, and sort of concerns around mental well-being, with the prevalence increasing from 1 in 10 children and young people to 1 in 8 over the last 5 years. And the emotional disorders that are most prevalent in 5 to 19-year-olds are anxiety disorders, and that's characterised by fear and worry, depressive disorders, such as things like sadness, loss of interest, low energy and low self-esteem, and mania and bipolar affective disorders. And what's really interesting looking at all the data is that half of all lifetime mental health problems emerge by the time the child has reached 14. So the school-age children, it really is of such high importance that preventative action is taken during those early years, in the primary sector, before the child reaches high school even, if we're going to see impact in reversing this growing trend and preventing more and more children and young people from facing mental health issues throughout their life course. In terms of the local picture, we have something called the Health Related Behaviour Survey, and that is a self-reported survey that children and young people in years 4, 6, 8 and 10 in Ealing schools undertake every 2 years. It's a large survey. It's not just focused on emotional well-being and mental health. It's all sorts of different health related issues, and we ask the pupils all about things that they do, their perceptions, their actions, their activities, their choices. And I've taken the data for the local perspective from the Health Related Behaviour Survey. Over 11,000 pupils in Ealing alone undertake the survey. And what's been interesting over the last, from 2017, there's been an overall decline in the mental health and well-being of children and young people. And the way that we measure that is with something called WEMWebs, which is an accumulation of data that's collected around 7 or 8 different questions, and they come up with a score, and the score indicates high levels of mental well-being all the way down to low levels, and we're seeing more and more children and young people with low levels of well-being, and a decline in those with the high levels of well-being. So there is a slow decline in our children and young people's mental health in Ealing based on those results. What we're also seeing is a rise in the number of children with SEND, and we do have an increase in the number of pupils with an education, health and care plan, and that has continuously increased over the last 5 years. And also, we are seeing that there's disproportionality. So children and young people of Black Caribbean descent are disproportionately affected by emotional health and well-being issues. And the reason we know that is because we have been looking carefully at the data to do with these learners in a project called the No Learner Left Behind project, and we've extrapolated the data for these particular students and compared them with the average data, and these pupils of the Black Caribbean pupils, they have a score of 39% of those feel cross or angry every day, compared to 20% of all pupils. And then also they're 4 times more likely to be excluded than their white peers. We've also had feedback from schools following the death of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matters movement, that there's been some children and young people who initially remained quite quiet about their experiences, but are now reflecting on how that they've been treated and they want to be heard. And some of them, there's been reports also that some have residual anger and frustration and hurt. So we're getting anecdotal reports of that as well. And the other thing locally that we've noticed, and I'm sure this isn't just in Ealing, but that the rise in the level of need and the demand in the level of service requirement has increased, certainly over the last 18 months, but the trajectory was rising before then, before COVID. We know that from anecdotal evidence shared by those that are working in schools, such as counselling services, mental health leads, designated safeguarding leads and pastoral staff. They're all saying the same thing, that the need and the demand is increasing. And we also have referral data. So the data that is collected through the inquiries that come through the Ealing Children's Integrated Response Service, so ECHRS, which is our single point of entry into social care, that there has been a huge increase over the last 18 months in inquiries through that channel that have got mental health and wellbeing related issues. So just moving on about the impact of all of this, we know, again, from the research that children and young people who have mental health and wellbeing issues are finding school more difficult. For example, those with a mental health condition are eight times more likely to refuse schools than those without. And across England, 6.8% of children and young people with a mental health disorder have actually been excluded from school compared to 0.5% of those without. And the alternative provision settings have the rate of mental health disorders for those pupils is 1 in 2. I said earlier that ours is the mainstream school sector, it's 1 in 8. So 1 in 2 if a child is in alternative provision settings in terms of their mental health need. And also the effects on young people. We know that this is a life course issue that affects their educational outcomes, their earnings, their employability, their ability to maintain relationships, and also the likelihood of them engaging in risk-taking behaviour.
No, it doesn't.
So there's a lot of reason that this needs to be an area of particular focus. And I think what's really important to sort of take stock is that there's over 54,000 children and young people attending state-funded schools in Ealing currently. And so what schools do in terms of addressing and supporting and signposting and acknowledging and working towards addressing the mental health needs of children and young people, and all the work that they're doing around that, they see these people's day in, day out, really is going to have a profound and long-lasting impact. And so that is a reason for the service that I work with, of working with schools to help support them. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yes. Have we got the slides now?
We have got the slides. That's all great. But Carlo, could you just mute yourself because we're hearing a bit of noise off in your household, Councillor Musardi. Thank you.
Thanks.
Carry on.
Thank you. Okay, so the next part of the report talks about the impact of COVID-19 and the impact that's had on the mental health and well-being of children and young people. This has obviously been the biggest health crisis for generations, and the measures that our government has had to take, like many others, in order to limit the spread of the virus, has included strict restrictions on movement, closures of schools, and this has all been necessary to save lives. But obviously what happens now and what has happened is going to have such a long-lasting impact on children and young people's mental health for years to come. And that can be down to the fact that they've been at home where they've experienced traumatic experiences in the home, pressures of isolation, breakdown in the support that they would ordinarily receive from school. And while schools and services are working extremely hard to continue providing support for those children and young people, they are telling us that they're under huge pressure, and that we're in a position at the moment where we need to prepare for more children and young people needing support for their mental health and well-being now that restrictions are starting to be lifted. And that's why we're working locally to ensure that the young people can get the help that they need and when they need it. And I'll talk a bit more about the partnership working that we're involved in to help with that in a second. In terms of what we know around the impact of COVID on mental well-being of children and young people, the prevalence of mental health issues has increased from 1 in 8 to 1 in 6 over the last 18 months. And we know, like I was saying, that school closures have caused further deterioration in those mental health issues. Adolescents have been particularly badly affected. It's at a time when those adolescents would be out and socializing and gaining independence, and that obviously hasn't been happening. Social isolation and a lack of contact with peers, and also interestingly I heard at the beginning about the links with physical activity, and it's been recognized that levels of physical activity have been a lot lower, and that may also be a contributing factor to the reason why mental well-being the issue with mental well-being is increasing. We also know that children with special educational needs, that school provides a really safe environment, but also that other interventions are offered within school for those children, and that those have been negatively affected in terms of them being able to support children with special educational needs throughout the pandemic and the lockdowns. So the well-being of our most vulnerable pupils was regularly monitored both in children's centres and in schools. We've spoken with senior leaders in all settings, and they report that more pupils and families are experiencing difficult situations at home with cramped living conditions, family breakdown, incidents of domestic abuse are increasing, huge financial difficulties and shortage in the basics of food and the necessities that you need to be able to get through and provide for your family. What was interesting, they also reported an increase in those which have been termed newly vulnerable, and this is the group of young people who perhaps weren't seen before as having any particular vulnerability, but because of the lockdown and the social isolation and the financial difficulties, that they and their families were termed as being newly vulnerable because of these additional new pressures that they were having to contend with. So in this recent Public Health England report talking about the impact of COVID-19 on London's children and young people, I also find it interesting to note that 22% of children and 29% of young people with mental health problems actually had no contact with any adult, either at school or at home, with whom they could turn to during lockdown. And I think that is going to have a huge significant impact. Having one significant grown-up to be able to rely on is known to have play a huge part in coping and managing, and obviously without that, that they are even more vulnerable. When we have talked to schools, something that has been very positive, they've given us some really good news stories as well. So it's not just been the issues that I've just been talking about, but actually the improvement in relationships with families has been seen, mainly because of the need for families to be in touch with school, the fact that schools are contacting families that they know are particularly vulnerable. And so that has developed stronger relationships, and also the reach has widened because of the ways in which schools have been operating remotely. Having things like parents' evenings remotely has increased attendance, and that has been seen as being a real positive outcome. There's been more consistent communication and action from social care colleagues, which has been seen as a real positive because they are sharing information. They've been sharing information, and immediate reactions and responses have been shared in order to be able to look after and react and respond to those with the most acute needs. And also they reflected on how adaptable they've been in terms of using their systems and processes to accommodate the most vulnerable. Okay, so next I'm going to talk a little bit about what work we've been doing with schools to address mental health and wellbeing needs. I'm going to talk specifically about my team, and then I'm going to talk a bit about our partnerships and others that are involved in the work that we do. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the strategic work that I've been involved with. So I am the manager of the team, the health improvement team, and we are all qualified in health areas, including safeguarding prevention, mental health and emotional well-being. And we're a team that's sort of co-financed by schools who buy us back, the council and the Ealing CCG. Between us, we have 23 years experience of working with Ealing schools, and because of that, we've generated really excellent working relationships with our schools, and we often receive very positive feedback from schools and those that we work with closely. And those relationships that we've forged with our colleagues is really what sets us apart. We really do make it our mission to advocate on behalf of schools and ask for those that are working with or in our schools to consider what they're doing to make the interaction more meaningful and sustainable. So when we introduce interventions into school, that becomes something that is sustainable over time. As a team, we provide a universal level of support. I talked about the health-related behaviour survey at the beginning, and that's one of the universal offers from the team. We undertake that every 2 years, and we use that. And the way that we use that is in our annual health in school visits. So we invite every school leader, every head teacher to an annual health in school visit where we analyse their health related behaviour data of their pupils, and we use it to identify the health needs of their pupils and plan and prioritise the work for the year. This last year, 75% of schools had an annual health in school visit, which meant that they were aware of and were able to then think about and plan for changes that they wanted to bring in, or areas that they wanted to prioritise around health and wellbeing and health and wellbeing improvements. We offer a training programme which is all about helping to develop the workforce, and we also have a plethora of different communication that we share with our colleagues in schools, and it's all designed to really introduce schools to resources and tools that are going to be of use for them for addressing mental health and emotional wellbeing issues in their school. And one of those tools that we're really encouraging all schools to use is the mental health toolkit, and that's because it contains the 8 principles of the whole school approach to mental wellbeing, and we're really committed to getting every school on board with using the toolkit. It's a step-by-step guide to take them through what they need to do in order to look at all the different aspects of being a mentally healthy and mental health aware school, right from the leadership and management through the curriculum, working with parents, people voice, targeted support. So it's really something that we're very keen for schools to embrace and to use, and indeed lots of them do, but it's by no means universally used currently, and that is one of our main areas of work over the next year. I just wanted to draw your attention to a school that I think has used this principle of a whole school approach. The head teacher at Stanhope Primary School really promotes strong leadership in emotional well-being throughout the school, and she really supports this strong commitment to physical activity, as well as having a healthy dining experience, and strongly believes that that's a prerequisite for her pupils' capacity to learn. And I think it was interesting, in the Anna Freud Centre surveyed over 6,000 teachers recently about the sorts of policies and practices that their schools and colleges had in place, and they found that teachers said that their school or college had policies in place which reference mental health, but only 12% of primary schools and 16 of secondaries actually had a practical framework to support the implementation of those policies, and that's what this whole school approach to mental health and wellbeing is all about. So our next steps are to support senior leaders to lead change and embed a whole school approach in mental health, which we believe will have, school improvement. It will be a good school improvement tool, as it will not only look at mental health and wellbeing, but look at improving attainment, attendance, before things escalate and become more apparent and need more service intervention. I mentioned that we also get buyback from schools. So you'll see here we offer a range of different packages of support for schools, and the mental health package offers some bespoke work in your school, in in the school with the senior leadership team, looking at the health activities that they might need us to implement. And we also deliver whole school training, and they also then get access to our conference and to some drop-in days where they can look at their whole school approach, but also there's a Healthy Schools London Award programme, and they may want to work towards a bronze, silver or gold award, which will then help them to think about and plan for their whole school approach, but also get them an award, a Healthy Schools London Award as well. And as you can see, that there's some good stats that complement the work that we do in schools, with one school seeing a 33% increase in the pupils' ability to cope with stress after we'd done some work over the course of a year in a school. Okay, so from taking it from a team perspective now to a more strategic level, the Ealing Children and Young People Board has reprioritised recently, and it's unsurprising and really encouraging to see that mental health and resilience is one of the work streams. It's priority number 4. I've been approached by Public Health Ealing to be part of that membership, alongside West London NHS Trust, others from the local authority and from the Ealing Carer and Parent Forum. And we will be meeting to look at all of the information that I've been sharing with you and prioritising our next steps to work with children and young people over the course of I would imagine over the course of the next 2 to 3 years. So we will have a plan in place, but at the moment, like I say, it's we are yet to meet. It has just been launched as a proposed set of priorities. So that is something that we will I will be involved in. And then also one of the things that is important in my work is making sure that we link up with others that are delivering mental health and wellbeing support to children and young people in schools, so that schools really understand how it all links together. I think that's one of the biggest challenges, because it's really hard to join up all the different elements of health and social care and education, so that all of the health areas are represented, and that there's some coherence, because it's quite a complex landscape out there for schools to navigate. And so part of my job is to try and link in with those other areas and interpret and present back to schools in a coherent way what's available for them, and also to advocate on behalf of them and the children and young people at their school. So you'll see, as part of the Ealing Learning Partnership, which is the area that I work in, we have a Safeguarding and Wellbeing Committee that's got representation from schools, but also from social care, and from other parts of the organisation, parts of the local authority. The Children and Young People's Board, you saw earlier the priority number 4, focusing on mental health and wellbeing, and that is very much a partnership. So I'll be liaising and working alongside others and gleaning from them what's going on, and working with them on new areas of work. And then we've got the Safeguarding Children's Partnership, and when we were in lockdown 1 back in March last year, we started a safeguarding partnership between social care, so those that work in the ECHA service and in the contextual safeguarding service, safeguarding and early years. We've all met on a weekly basis ever since to talk about some of the issues that are coming to our attention through schools that we feel we can each contribute to, and then also convey information back to schools about what we're doing about those different issues. In terms of the specific wellbeing and mental health support programs, you'll see in the report I have listed several of those programs that I'm familiar with, some of them more familiar than others. The mental health support team, we've got Lisa Burridge on the call today, and Lisa is the project manager of the mental health support team programme, which has been around now for coming up for 2 years, just over 18 months. And the mental health support team it encompasses 3 different teams of mental health staff, both qualified and trainees, and they work directly in schools to address some low-level, real initial mental health and wellbeing concerns, either in primary school through working with the parents, or in high school working directly one-to-one with the pupils, in order to provide some evidence-based short-term interventions that enable those children and young people, or those parents, to learn new ways of doing things, and to address their anxiety or their low mood, which is what the interventions tend to focus on. You'll see there from the data the number of referrals and contacts, and those that have received a programme of 8 sessions. It's growing all the time. This is an area of growth and development, and it's an exciting one. Lisa, if you are on the call, would you mind just saying a little bit more about the mental health support team, and in particular Mental Health Support Teams Plus, please?
Yeah, sure. So this is just a sort of an overview, and I think unfortunately, our mental health support teams, when they sort of were just about to go live in schools, we obviously went into the first lockdown. So in terms of their output, that has been impacted quite a lot, just because of the nature of the initial training year. But as Karen said, we have got to a point now where as all the restrictions are reduced and the practitioners are able now to go back into schools, that we're starting to see a massive increase in the number of referrals and the potential packages of support being put in. I suppose our third team, so we've done that in green. So on this picture it shows that, so wave 3, our third team that came into place in November of last year. We did that bid, and we did that bid in partnership, and particularly with the Ealing Parent Carer Forum, and that was to start to try and address the real problems that families are experiencing, particularly those where they've got a child who's got suspected or diagnosed autism, and through that bid and subsequent additional funding, we've managed to put together a service now that's called MHST Plus, and this is a service that is predominantly for and to support families with who have children in this group. And well, the reason we've done this is because of the feedback from families, but also from schools, that there was a massive gap in being able to offer this kind of support. So it's a service that has just started, and we are working to roll it out to all primary schools. And I guess the difference that makes is, Karen mentioned that in primary schools, the focus, if it's working with families, is just with parents. But this means we can actually offer direct interventions to children from sort of much younger age. So depending on the intervention, either 5+ or 8+, to address some of those sort of anxiety needs. So that's kind of where we're at with that. So the plan is we will roll this out to all primary schools by December. The initial feedback through the development of our primary school cluster model is very positive, and schools are really excited about the development of this particular service. As part of our review of the service, as we start to finalise the offer that will be available to both primary and secondary schools, we've been doing lots of focus groups with parents and carers and the team themselves. And this is just some of the feedback that we've had initially. And I think what gets lost in all of this, because the big focus is just on the interventions with parents and young people, is actually what the schools value the most. And that is having consistent support in terms of consultation, where they've got a query about where to send children. and also just to get some additional support for their staff, so that in terms of training, so adds to the whole school approach, so that staff feel more confident in identifying children from the outset, so that early intervention works when it needs to work rather than there being a delay. And we know from all the evidence that the referrals that historically have come into our early intervention service in SAFE are often coming in 2 to 3 years late, because the referrals are not made until that point. So I think this is having the biggest impact. And I think the case study that Karen included in her report is also really good evidence of this.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, and I just wanted to draw your attention to a school's case study that it was in the report, because it really does display everything that we hoped in terms of this this service getting set up, but to actually see that there's a school and a child that has been struggling behaviourally, developing behaviours like tics and stammering, possibly linked to anxiety, but didn't reach threshold for a CAMHS referral and was rejected for a CAMHS referral, has now been seen through the mental health support team, and both parent and pupil have been seen massive improvements in terms of their levels of anxiety, but also they've been further referred onto other services. So it's opened so many doors for this family and helped in the short term, but also is going to have a longer term impact as well. So just great encouraging case study examples from schools, which is brilliant. So other work that we are involved in schools is we've been developing a wellbeing return to education programme, which we received funding. We received notification of funding in August of last year to support schools with the return to school of children and young people when they came back in September. So there was a big rollout of a training programme. Lisa and I were involved in collaborating with our providers, counselling services and our university colleagues to deliver training to up to 80 individual members of senior staff across schools in Ealing, and then also an offer after that of wellbeing support, and the majority of schools signed up to take part in packages of support that we put together with our educational psychology service, our counselling providers, and others that we've been working alongside. There's the Mentors in Violence Prevention service or package of support, which we are looking to roll out further over the next year with the recruitment of a coordinator. The Trusted Spaces is a very targeted area of work, working predominantly in high schools where there are concerns around contextual safeguarding, and then the Self-Heal Resilience Project. I think one of the things, all of these reports can be found in your appendices, but now that I'm moving on to the challenges and the next steps, one of the biggest challenges for somebody who is trying to make sense of and provide support in schools is the inconsistent and uncertain funding stream. So we rely quite heavily at the moment on grant funding. So the Wellbeing Return to Education programme, for example, was a one-off grant funded programme. We were given a sum of money and then we had to do something with it in a certain amount of time. And it does seem that central government at the moment are working in that way, where we get pots of money for short-term projects, and we're not getting that sort of consistent draw on money so that we can make services in a more consistent way and more accessible and long term. So that is a key challenge. The other is for all schools to prioritise mental wellbeing. And this is something that me and my team have been working on, trying to engage and ensure that schools understand the long-term effects of mental ill health. And also the other challenge is getting our mental health support team universally accessible across all schools. And as Lisa mentioned, we're in the process of piloting a cluster model currently to see how that works. And that's very much a part of our next steps. But I think from speaking and gathering all the evidence for the report, and because of the work that I do, and having spoken to many that work in the area, work in schools and also in the mental health services, the key issue is around getting children and young people the right support from that right service at the right time for them. And I think the main blockers for that, and the challenges for that, are for staff in schools to know how and when to respond, know how and where to refer particular pupils, and where and who to refer to, and then really it's about service availability and accessibility. So there's some of the challenges that we do face, but we are very aware of and that we're working through, and our next steps really do reflect that. So I'm looking forward to working on developing the Children and Young People's Mental Health Strategy, which is one of the key areas for the Children and Young People's Board, priority number 4. The group will be looking at developing that. Also collectively developing an early intervention mental health care pathway for schools, completing on the cluster pilot, relaunching the mental health toolkit, delivering those packages of support to those 12 schools, and continuing with our workforce development and training programme, and then also recruiting to the MVP coordinator role, all of which will be addressing mental health and wellbeing needs of children and young people across Ealing. Thank you all very much.
So thank you very much for that very wide-ranging presentation, Karen, and also to Lisa. So I'll abuse my chair's prerogative and ask the first question, but could I see hands up from councillors who want to ask other questions in the first? Basically, I think it's probably helpful to divide it up into, sorry, not just councillors, also our co-optees as well. I think it's probably helpful to divide it up into the sections that are in the report. So if we have questions first on section 1, which is what we know about mental health and well-being of Ealing's children and young people. I would say I'll ask the first question, but then I saw Marianne and Simon. So yeah, firstly, so quite a bit of the data is based on the survey results, and I just wondered what proportion of the pupils in each year group take the survey, and just looking at some of the non-mental health aspects of it, you know, it kind of, some of them looked a bit too good to be true, as if maybe some of the students were kind of filling in what they thought their school would like them to say about how many times a day they brush their teeth or whatever. So I just wondered, clearly it's still useful because it's comparative, the figures are getting worse, that means something, but the actual kind of percentages, how accurate do we think that is?
Yeah, we're constantly working with the survey, the people that produce the survey, to support us in both helping schools undertake the survey in the best way possible. But yeah, years 4, 6, 8 and 10 are those that undertake it, and they undertake it every 2 years. So it's the same cohort each year. Which is helpful in terms of trend analysis, but completely take your point that, and you know, I've had conversations with those that do, that coordinate and facilitate it in schools, and they raise concerns about pupils either putting down the answers that they think they should, but it's all in that preparatory work, and we rely on our colleagues in schools to do that preparatory work with pupils in order to get as accurate a result as possible. But we know it's not 100%, there's always going to be some flaws, but we've been doing it since 2005, so we've actually got a really good sort of, you know, we can look at and analyze the trends over that time, which shows that there's not much change actually. There's some big changes when there's something that's happened nationally, and we're looking forward to our autumn survey because we you know, we think that there will be an awful lot to glean from that post-COVID.
Thank you. And can I have a question from Dr. Eisen, please, now?
Thank you. I think what you've described is so impressive and such a huge amount of work. But one thing that I think, which may be not within your purview, is that when people are training to be teachers, the amount of the opportunity they have for this sort of work is minimal. And I think classroom teachers would obviously hugely appreciate any help you can give in their classroom practice. But my question is there any way you have any inroads into influencing teacher training so that teachers come into schools better prepared to deal with the mental health issues?
That's a great question, and I wish I could say yes. I personally, I don't, but Julie Lewis is on the call. I don't know, Julie, if there's anything that's been done elsewhere with regards to training our NQTs and whether there's any influence that we have in that area.
Yes, thank you. I mean, we do know that the whole of the first 2 years of teacher training has been overhauled, and from September, the Early Careers Teacher Programme will now last, so for 2 years, effectively newly qualified teachers, it will take them 2 years to be qualified rather than 1. So there's definitely much more emphasis on all aspects of children's development and well-being. So I think we're pretty hopeful about that, actually. Brilliant.
Sorry, I was just going to say that,
Lisa,
yeah, just from the MHST perspective, obviously, this is essentially a massively new project, and we've been involved in meetings with NHSE and our regional mental health leads over this entire time and through the entire pandemic. And I think one of the things is the themes that are coming through from that, I think, are also feeding into the national picture. So whilst we can't say Ealing is definitely doing that, I think there is a real collective view that this is something that is really missing from teacher training. And for all the support and everything that we're doing, if our teachers don't get that grounded education at the outset, it's then very difficult or makes it very challenging to then work with teams like the mental health support teams or the educational psychologists. So I think it's being acknowledged at a national level now, but how much influence and what change we see, we hope, I think I'm with Julie, we hope that will, for the first time, there'll be a lot of evidence and a push towards that.
Thank you. So Councillor Woodruff, your hand went down again. Are you asking about another section? Was that it?
Oh, did it go down? I didn't mean to.
Oh, I didn't mean to. Right. Well, I'll call you for your question then. Yeah.
I think it was this section. It was just you kind of highlighted the Black Caribbean pupil.
Yeah.
I was just wondering about other, shall we say, diverse groups, particularly other ethnic groups, or maybe difference in girls and boys, children, pupils with disabilities, all those sort of things. Whether I was interested in what we just said about Black Caribbean, but I was wondering about the other groups.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And yes, without a doubt, there's when you extrapolate the data for different ethnic groups and for gender, you often see differences in the data. And what we've done with some of the high school data is put that all of the data onto a spreadsheet for high schools to see, so that they can see both the questions and the answers, but also the contextual data as well, and then be able to see whether there's any particular groups of pupils that need particular support. And also each school gets their own report, and it gets broken down into the areas of the Ofsted framework. And again, they'll be able to see from using that a sort of I can't remember what you call it in statistical terms, but it's like a sliding scale to see how much in terms of the compared to the average, how much better or worse you're doing in that area. So there are definitely ways in which we can drill down in that data, and we do that, but I just haven't presented it here today.
Thank you. Could I just ask one more question, which was about, I noticed in the figures that levels of bullying that reported were quite high on page 52.
Yeah.
So
that's a common feature.
Yeah. Yeah, there's I mean, as I said earlier on, I was sort of saying the numbers on some things look low, but they really, yeah, so sort of 45% of people responded they were pushed, hit, kicked for no reason, at least a few times in the month before the survey, for instance. Yeah, I suppose the question really is what do you feel that feeds into the mental health problems, and what can we encourage schools to do to try and address it?
I think schools have, bullying has been something that schools have contended with for a long time, and cyberbullying now is very much an issue that a lot of schools are talking to their pupils about, and as well as their parents. In terms of the work that they do, we have support programs, we have resources available for schools to address bullying in particular. And there tends to be a big focus on things like, what do we mean by bullying? So there's a real unpicking and an understanding right from primary school all the way through, so that the sort of one-off name calling isn't the insidious bullying that we know has such a detrimental impact on mental well-being. So working with pupils and with staff on those sort of definitions of what bullying is, as well as then providing resources and support and training. And every year we do the anti-bullying, we have anti-bullying week in November, and we provide all of the resources for schools to use, and it's also threaded throughout the whole of the curriculum. So we've got a new scheme of work that came out 2 years ago now, and relationships and peer relationships in particular has a big emphasis. So there's lots of work that schools are doing in order to address bullying, but it is the persistent, when we look at that data, bullying incidents don't seem to be coming down at all.
Thank you. So we'll move on to the second section, which was about the impacts of the pandemic on children's mental health. Do we have any questions on that section of the report and presentation? Yes, that's right. So Josephine Spencer, can I hear your question, please?
Well, my question relates to exams and how disruptive they've been. I didn't hear that mentioned specifically in the presentation, but I just wonder what additional support there is, whether it forms part of a mental health toolkit, or what you can do to support schools who, when they reintroduce formal exams, are presented with pupils who've got much less practice of actually taking exams, external exams.
It's a really good point. And I think, schools are definitely, acutely aware when we talk to them about the fact that preparatory work for undertaking exams after the upheaval that they've faced over the last 18 months is going to be a priority. In terms of the support that we offer as a team, that's not something that we've directly supported schools in, but if we were to be requested to do that, then that would be something that we could turn our attention to. But yeah, I mean, schools are so well served in that respect of understanding their pupils with regards to getting them ready for exams, but we may well see sort of unprecedented pressure and huge anxiety. So preparing them to be able to help pupils deal with that through things like the counselling services in schools that are offering group sessions. The MHST are also doing things with parents. So they've got a transition webinar, 3 different dates over the course of the next 2 months for Year 6 parents to attend, to help their children transition from Year 6 to Year 7. So there's a lot of sort of reaction and response to those heightened levels of need, and we're working with the services in order to be able to meet that. And as and when schools come to us, we will respond.
Thank you.
Can I just respond to that as well? I think it's really important. I mean, Karen's team, myself, and the MHST, because we've been involved in this developmental project from the outset. One of the things that the MHST can offer and does offer to high schools, particularly through all of this, is there's a program. It's an evidence-based program that's run in partnership with John Moores University over in Liverpool, and that really does start to address stress around exams. And one of the things that we've been looking at as part of this review, while we sort of put out the new offer for high schools as we move out of a project phase and into a service, a permanent service, is to look at that, because the program that was on offer runs over a number of weeks, and that's not maybe necessarily what schools want. They want something that's shorter. So that's something that we're actually working on with Karen's team and all our other partners. We work with the counselling organisations, and the point that we've all got to now is that everybody wants to work together in a very collaborative way and share resources, and we want to reduce the issues around duplication. So we are looking at that extensively about how we can do that, and that should be in our offer, probably as part of the Wellbeing to Return programme. There's a phase 3 that we're all planning on now, but also when we think about what the MHSTs will offer in the longer term.
Thank you, Lisa. So not seeing any more hands on this, so we'll move to section 3 of the report, which is working with schools to address identified mental health needs. Are there any questions on this section of the report and recommendation? If not, we'll move on to section 4, which is specific wellbeing and mental health support programs and expected impact. So yeah, I had, while people are thinking whether to put hands up, I had a question on this one. It's on one of the appendices that relate to this for Lisa. So page 224, which is the yeah. So the team activity at the bottom. It may just be the way I was reading it, but it sounded like it was sort of trying to extrapolate the numbers with kind of incomplete information. It was sort of assuming.
In terms of the are you talking about in terms of the activity for the mental health?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
I just wondered why that was.
Well, I think it's taken a while for us in the local authority as commissioners or co-commissioners with the CCG to really unpick what's required in terms of the performance metrics, which allows us to have this data. That sort of entire set of metrics has now been formally agreed, and it's only very recently that we've had enough data, but we haven't had it all. So although we've agreed the metrics, there's quite a lot of it missing, which means it's really difficult to report on. And we've also been working very closely with the trust, because it's in terms of how that they report. So one of the things I draw people's attention to is the fact that it's the consultation and the signposting that's really valuable to schools, and that data isn't captured. So that's kind of missing. And part of that requires the teams themselves and how they actually load that data onto their system in order for that data to be pulled off. We've actually now agreed that we've got quantitative, which is what they have to report in terms of the minimum data set for mental health, but also a qualitative element, so that we can really get to grips with the number of groups, the number of psychoeducation sessions, the number of people that have accessed that. And I think then that makes a massive difference in terms of the picture of the type of activity. So we acknowledge that that is an issue. We have got to a point where we can now get that data, but they've now got an issue with, they had an issue with the last reporting, which made it really difficult to do anything but extrapolate in that way, was because the data wasn't pulling through correctly. So they're away resolving that issue. So we are very much expecting to have much better, fuller, more useful data in the future. It's been a bit of a long road, but it's complicated by so many other issues. Particularly the pandemic has really affected the slowness of that piece of work, unfortunately.
Okay, great. Thanks very much for that. So I don't see any other hands up. So the next section is on strategic groups and partnerships, really, the sort of partnerships with other organisations. Are there any questions on that section?
So Councillor Woodruff's got his hand up.
Oh, sorry, missed that. Sorry, was that for this? Which section was it? What was that for? Sorry, I missed you somehow. Your mic's off.
Actually, it was back going to the schools thing, because I'm interested in this whole issue about exclusions. I mean, I've been a school governor, been involved in excluding people, but I've also worked in a prison where I know various people are there with serious mental problems and having been excluded. And I'd kind of wonder whether there's a cause or effect thing about exclusion. I know it's a big issue, but I kind of think it's quite a significant one, really.
It really is, and it's really pleased that you've brought that into the conversation, because it's one of the things that I've been talking about with my manager, who leads on inclusion and SEND, and we've been looking at how we bring together, and it's one of the next steps really for us, how we bring together both the behaviour and inclusion aspects of schools work together with the mental health and well-being, but also the safeguarding prevention work. They all marry up together in my mind in terms of the prevention and also the treatment, the cure, if you like, the sort of crisis management, and getting it right from the start, which is where the MHSTs come in. When children and young people are sort of, when there's a behaviour change in those children and young people that suggests that something's not right, that becomes the catalyst or the sort of indicator, the trigger for conversations to start to be had, whether that's through the mental health support teams and the link officer working with them, or whether it's on a wider scale through the use of the EHAP, the early help assessment process. And we're talking with our EHAP workers to support schools in really starting to discern when those behaviours, those initial behaviours, that a lot of the acting out or even the internalising are noticeable in terms of the very first steps towards something not being right, and that we need to talk with our behaviour and inclusion specialists and our safeguarding specialists and our mental health teams to look at how we can make sense of all of those different aspects for schools, so that they are clear about what their behaviour policy says, what is part of their mental health policy or their whole school approach to mental well-being, what their safeguarding policy is, and so it's all married together, and it isn't piecemeal and separate. It becomes very much, and I think many schools do that, but I don't think it's universal as yet. And I think in our high schools, we've definitely got opportunities to be able to have those conversations about what is a behavioural incident, what is the start of a mental health issue, and how do we help the people manage that, as well as help the staff to ensure that they are following due procedure and policy around behaviour management, for example. So it is definitely a piece of work that we're starting, but we haven't got there yet.
And Lisa, did you want to come back in on that as well?
Yeah, I think it was just to say that we know obviously all the evidence suggests that parenting programs make a massive difference, and I think that's that's where we can start in primary schools, and where there are initial indicators, we're in a much better place, I think. And with the offer of group interventions where we bring families together, we work with the whole parenting offer, because there's a mass parenting offer across the borough of Ealing, and it is then about coordinating and making sure that the right parents get to the right group and that they're encouraged and they're not left behind. And certainly one of the things that we will be doing, and we definitely have started doing in terms of the MHST, these interventions that have been offered to parents on a one-to-one basis have been because either they don't feel that they can attend a group, they don't have the language to do that or the confidence to do that. So we're able to offer the one-to-one intervention, but essentially it is that parenting program. It's just on a one-to-one basis. And, you know, the evidence suggests that as all this comes together, that it does make a massive difference. We know that from all the research that's currently being done.
Thank you. Simon, did you want to come back on that? Or was that a legacy hand?
Yeah, no, it's a legacy. It's a legacy.
Fine. Okay, good.
I keep forgetting it.
That's right. So I think
also it's different on Teams and Zoom, isn't it? So
yeah. Well, continually learning. I think the last section of the presentation was about challenges and next steps. I mean, I was very conscious that there's a problem that there tend to be pots of money from government that are short term, you know, when what you need is longer term funding. But that's something we hear often in different parts of the council. And yeah, so the only thing, while seeing if anyone else has hands, the only thing I would ask on that section really was what specifically do you think that we can do going forward to assist with making sure that the staff within schools know who the right referral channels are? I mean, I suppose it ties in really with Marianne's question from earlier on, but sort of specifically on the referrals, that was one of the points that you raised, that often at the moment the staff in schools don't know which channel to refer to and when.
Yeah, and we've got a very sort of robust program of workforce development training, and I don't know if you're familiar with there's some new announcement just last week, I think, on mental health leads in schools being able to bid for funding to get training from legitimate providers that have been quality assured. So it's promoting those sorts of training programs where and the sort of ongoing drip effect of talking about this, bringing it to their attention, and making sure that the rollout of the mental health support teams continues, and not just training those that are teaching staff. We've had great success with the mental health first aid training program with support staff and pastoral staff, so that they really are the eyes and the ears in the school in terms of working with pupils and picking up on those behavioural incidents or those concerns that pupils bring to their door. So I think we have to continue on developing that programme of training and workforce development. That would be my priority. I don't know, Lisa, if there's anything you want to add to that. And
I think what's been interesting, so we, in terms of the MHST, so that we can actually roll out the MHST programme to all primary schools, which is what we're aiming to do by December. We've started with this sort of cluster pilot where we brought together between 3 and 5 primary schools based on pupil numbers, essentially geography and deprivation and a number of other factors, but we brought them together into clusters. And so far, we've had complete sign up for every school within the cluster, and what the idea being that we start to bring them together. So it's about shared learning. It's about sharing resources, economies of scale. So if we can deliver teacher training to 6 primary schools rather than 1, but we do it in a bespoke way that meets their needs, then we get greater reach. And what's been really interesting, so we've had all of this sort of secondary meetings with the MHST, and what has been identified by all of those schools is that the MHST is now going to work to deliver specific sessions to all staff, including not necessarily just teachers, but all support staff, around the identification and how that they can work with that, and how that they can start to think about some of these issues. And as a result of that, the work that we've been doing there, we are actually working very closely now. Well, we work very closely with West London NHS Trust, which is our provider. But we've also recognised that they've asked for a sort of a Q&A session around how do we, where do we go and what we're doing. So we're hosting that in the next couple of weeks. And West London have been busily updating all of that data. So the information that I shared with you for the pre-agenda meeting, that's all being updated, and that will be relaunched in the next sort of week prior to that workshop. So I think it's like Karen says, we're constantly looking at ways of how we can engage, and we're trying to do it at a sort of local level, a borough level, just so that we're reiterating those messages, along with the training program, the Wellbeing to Return program, and all of the other avenues.
Great, thanks very much, Lisa. So if we don't have any more questions, I think that's we've got yeah, Councillor Martin, you had a question at this point? Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really about everything in the report. I suppose it's a broader question. So, firstly, thank you for the report. Thought it was an excellent piece of work, and was slightly stunned into silence by some of the statistics that you put in. Quite a worrying situation, really. But you go on to talk about a lot of positive work that you're doing, and I just wondered, how optimistic are you about the future and where the trends are going? And how big is the gap between what we can provide to support those young children and what we actually have need for? So we don't.
Wow,
that is a question.
$50 million question.
I think we'd need I think, to be fair, we would need West London NHS Trust here as well to answer that much bigger, broader question. I mean,
but I think. Sorry, go on, Lisa.
I was going to say, so the scrutiny panel review has been broken down into sections, and I think because it is such the most enormous area, and therefore I think it is quite hard. I think we could probably answer that question more readily at the end of this entire review than we could accurately identify that here. But that's my opinion.
And actually, in terms of your question about optimism, it's been through this process of bringing it all together and trying to make sense of it all, and articulating the successes but also the challenges, and knowing the work that's going on. I am very optimistic, because what we didn't have before was a service that sort of was filling that huge gap of early intervention for mental health, picking up mental health difficulties right at the outset. And now we do, and not only have we got that, we are growing that, and it really is exciting. It's an exciting time for schools. All of the feedback is really positive from schools, and I do think they are going to welcome it with open arms. Those that haven't had it before, it's been in 32 of our schools so far, so we're now in this phase now of transitioning it out to all schools. So to be able to offer that out to every school is hugely exciting and slightly overwhelming.
Yeah, I would add to that. I mean, I took on this being the lead for this project because it is phenomenally exciting. I think Wave 3 with the MHST Plus is even more exciting, and I think we just know that having just offered this out to these additional, I'm just trying to think how many more schools. I think with the cluster model, I think it's gone out, so from the 32 schools it's gone out to another 15 schools, and just in these latter few weeks, the amount of feedback and the emails that I'm getting to people are genuinely really excited and planning on making best use of the resource. And I think that is a massive, and I think what's been even more to me, and the thing that I've been trying to do since Karen and I have been working together since September 2019, is we really wanted to focus on building a step down pathways at school level, and we've done a bit of piloting of that last year, and it's been very successful in a couple of high schools that we looked at it. We have total buy-in from all our counselling partners and everybody who works in schools to support schools. And it was amazing and very exciting to witness the fact that schools making that choice themselves, and then to see emails going, actually, we've had this coordinated meeting, we've got these children, and we've decided these children need to go here and these children need to go there. And suddenly you think, actually, that's how we can start to really resolve this problem, because if they are doing that as a collective, with all the different people working in the schools, then we know that starts to answer the challenge, making sure that the child gets to the right service at the right time. And that's how we need to do it. And we also need to do that thinking more widely about our voluntary sector colleagues, all of the other additional services that they have, and making sure that that signposting happens so that there's ongoing support. And that doesn't matter whether it's a WhatsApp group for parents, or whether it's putting them in touch with Contact, or putting them in touch with services offered by Mind. But I think the important thing is, and we're starting to see that, and that makes me hugely excited, because I think that's what we've been working from for the outset. Karen and I have done huge amounts of that with our partners and our community partners. And I think that's really where it's at. That's how we can start to make some difference within the constrained budget resources that we have.
Thank you. Right, so can I ask Councillor Burke to ask what's going to have to be the last question, because we've got another presentation to give some time to. So yeah, Councillor Burke.
So apologies for lateness. I've just been at a school governors meeting actually, so talking about this very issue, so it couldn't be more pertinent. It is a little bit of a follow-on from Dee's point. It is just about expectation management. I think this is an absolutely brilliant project, but you know, the particular school I was just talking to, the engaged, etc., but raising expectations, not least amongst parents, that, you know, that more can be done than there is provision for. And also to declare an interest. I also work for an NHS trust, so, you know, sort of see it from both sides. So I suppose it's really how we as counsellors, the question is really how we as counsellors, and also help schools to manage the expectation that you may get a service, but it may not be the service that you really think you want to need.
Yeah, I to answer your question, we are acutely aware of that, and that's one of the reasons in this sort of first sort of 2 years, as you know, from this programme, is that we have had a sort of measured offer with a very clear contract with schools stipulating what is possible and what they're going to get. We've done that all the way through this project. And I think now that we're in the and that's why we're doing this other pilot with the primary schools in terms of the cluster, because ultimately at the moment we have 16 high schools and they all have a service and they're all offered up to half a day of time. So that's quite limited, but it's realistic, and that's what has been offered. And obviously we're in the process of rebadging that and working that, and that's because all the practitioners will be all qualified by the end of November, and that makes a huge difference to capacity. So that's one thing. The second thing, the cluster, why we're doing the pilot is because we've actually actively asked those schools in that pilot to help us to evaluate what's possible in order that we can level the expectation appropriately, so that when we start to move forward and we think about, because we're calling the pilot phase 1 and we see that ending at the end of September, we'll start phase 2 in September and so on. And that's how we're going to do it, is that then that means that those contracts that we then issue to schools will be a realistic, so that manages that expectation of what's possible. And that's why we want to, because I think one of the things we've learned from COVID, we've learned that parents actually really like groups delivered online or psychoeducation sessions delivered online, because it's more convenient. We know that we have working windows where timings that are important, and parents are fed back to that. And we know that we need to move to providing sessions in the evening when kids have gone to bed. We also know from schools that the staff really do like the online psychoeducation sessions and the online consultation meetings, because they're much easier to manage. So I think it's going to be about mixed mode delivery, And one of the things we've been really clear with the schools is if we can come together as a collective over a geographic location, we can identify need, we can deliver lots of those sessions, lots of those groups across their cluster. And some of those training sessions, not just across cluster, we can deliver them across multiple clusters, or we can deliver them across borough. So I think that's the work, and that feels that it's a massive complex task to get all of that lined up, and we recognise that, and we recognise there'll need to be more administrative support to provide for that. But I think that's how we manage expectation, because I think we can't promise all things to everybody. That's completely unrealistic. But what we can do through this piloting process, and from what we've gained from the high schools to date and all of their feedback, it is then possible to put out an offer that is that they can truly expect from the team for high schools, because we'll have 17 in September, and then from primary schools, working with primary schools, Karen's team, all our other partners, the educational psychologists that are hugely helpful in all of this, and what we gleaned from the social working pilot that's going on in schools. I think that's how we make that contract clear, so that both sides know what they're getting in relation to the support. And I think that's the only way we can do it, because otherwise, you're right, we would raise parent expectation unreasonably, and that's only just going to cause more problems in the system than we can ever solve. So yeah.
Great.
So, thanks, Lisa.
Thanks. Yes. So yeah, thanks very much to Karen and Lisa, and
You're
to
welcome.
And to Julie and other officers who are either on the call or have been involved in the excellent work that you've been telling us about. We now move on to Flora Wilkie, who is the advisor on children and young people at the Local Government Association, who will be presenting on the broader national picture. The PowerPoint has been circulated to members in advance with the briefing note, but Flora is going to present it to us. Hopefully the IT works this time.
Yes, hopefully all the bad luck went to Karen. So hopefully everyone can see that.
Yes, I can see the first page. That's working. Yeah, great. Thanks.
So thank you very much for having me this evening, and it's going to be a hard task to follow the interesting and exciting things that Karen and her colleagues were just talking about that are going on in Ealing. So as Councillor Ball said, I'm Flora Wilkie, I'm an advisor at the Local Government Association. I'm in the Children and Young People Policy team. For those who don't know, the LGA is a representative body for local government. We work with councils to support and promote and improve, and we also work really closely with central government to ensure that the views and experiences of councils are represented in their any policy and guidance that are put forward. So we've got the lead for various different areas, so kind of early years, youth services, youth justice and mental health. And I think kind of from the conversations that went on earlier on, kind of there is very much a mental health line that goes throughout kind of the entire life stream of children and young people. I'm on secondment from Surrey County Council, where as commissioning manager for children's health and wellbeing services, so working really closely with my CCG colleagues on our CAMS contract and community health services. So as you said, today I'm going to run through a bit of what's going on in the national picture, what some of the stuff that's come out of government over the last kind of couple of years, the response to COVID-19 and some of the work that we've been doing in the LGA, and share some topics of good practice. I think Karen also mentioned a couple of the areas, so I will try not to kind of go over too much previous ground. So these are some of the areas that kind of have been guiding the government policy direction over the last kind of 5-6 years or so, particularly around children and young people's mental health. I think it kind of, you'll see that quite a lot of them are NHS focused areas around future in mind, 5-year forward view. So what kind of councils need to be working really closely with their partners to make sure they are able to implement and work together on these different areas. So kind of a couple of the things, Karen and her colleague mentioned the 27 Green Paper and some of the elements that have come out of that in terms of mental health support teams and the designated senior lead. So I won't go into too much detail on them at the moment. Just kind of recapping some of the areas. So the Future in Mind in 2015, that had some additional funding for CCGs. The intention was to reduce stigma, improve access and waiting times for services. There was about 1.25 billion investment into mental health support over 5 years. It was for 5 years, like the programme itself, the Future in Mind direction was for 5 years, so it has now come to an end. It's meant to be embedded within CCG baselines. You may have heard of local transformation plans, which lots of CCGs have, and is in partnership with councils, so that's where these came from. Looking at the NHS long-term plan, it's more recent development that was really aiming to embed some of the commitments that were set out in the 2017 Green Paper, looking at really trying to work on improving that access to mental health services. So in additional, trying to provide access for an additional 345,000 children and young people to be seen a year. And this is also trying to look at including much more around that transition age, so improving support up to the age of 25. So we know it's a real challenge for young people if they're in the mental health services at 18. So it's trying to reduce that kind of cliff edge point of it. We've got on there also the Mental Health Act. This is something that does primarily look at adults. It was a consultation was launched in January, which I think it closed in April. But it was really looking around those supports for adults if they are detained under the Mental Health Act, and also for children if they are. Some key elements that affected children and young people around understanding that capacity, elements around a nominated person. And there are also some additional challenges that we pointed out in our response to it around challenges for social care. And just the final one to bring attention to there is that changes to the relationship, sex education and health, extra kind of PSHE style thing is what it used to be known as in schools. So all schools are expected to have embedded this now by the summer 2021 summer term. So the one that we're in at the moment, and I think it's also become increasingly important with all the conversations that have been going on recently around abuse and sexual assault in schools. So as I said, just touch slightly more detail onto the 27 Green Paper, because that's the area that's really driving a lot of kind of the Department for Education's work around mental health at the moment. So Karen and colleagues mentioned the designated senior lead for mental health in schools. It was set out in the Green Paper, but it's something that's only coming to kind of fruition at the moment in the next kind of couple of months. So it's going to be launched in September. The DfE have started sending out some comms around this, and they're really encouraging the local authority to work with schools to help direct them, to identify schools which may need some of this additional help, and to identify areas of schools that may be doing kind of more referrals, or ones that they just think that designated senior lead might help. So the senior lead's really focusing on training up and upskilling a member of staff so they can start to develop that whole school approach to mental health. And I think it would be really interesting to see how that fits with the services that Karen and her team provide. It sounds like a lot of that is going on in Ealing already. The other one we kind of talked about a lot is the mental health support teams in schools. Really interesting and exciting to hear what's going on in Ealing at the moment. It sounds like you guys are really far along in the work around it. We recently had a little bit more investment into mental health support teams in schools and a more national process, because they were initially planning, I think it's rolling out to 20-25% of local areas by 2023, if I get my dates right. But there's been some additional funding to help speed that up following COVID-19. And the final one that was kind of really outlined in the 2017 Green Paper was some pilots around 4-week waiting times for treatment in mental health services. So it's only been trialled in a few places, and I think kind of colleagues can understand it can be quite challenging, but there was significant additional investment put in place to enable local authorities and their CCG partners that are in these areas to cover that and to try and progress that work. So moving on to a slightly more current picture, these are some of the things that the government put out in response to COVID-19 and the challenges and experiences that children and young people have. I think it's been captured really well, and it's probably well known, and as mentioned by Karen and colleagues, the impact that COVID-19 has had on children and young people and their mental health. And this is on top of the kind of growing need that was in the system already. There's been some kind of quite concerning things coming out around increases in eating disorders in particular, but also a kind of general increase in referrals as children and young people are going back into schools, being seen by more people, and that need is being uncovered. So some of the initiatives that are put out, Wellbeing for Education Recovery was the first one, I think, that was provided by government in September last year, and then that has been repeated again this year for Wellbeing for Education Return. So both got about 7 or 8 million to go across the country, going directly to local authorities for them to choose kind of where they think the areas of greatest need may be. Up to the local area to decide what they wanted to do. Karen mentioned that you've been looking particularly at training. Some other places have been looking at resourcing specific staff or setting up a phone line for teachers and education staff to use if they're particularly concerned about different children and young people. Next one's a mental health action group. This was set up by Minister Ford to look at how they can support schools. The group's been meeting quite regularly over the last couple of months and has been reaching out to different sector bodies. So they've been speaking to people who represent early years providers, for example. We've been working with them from a local authority perspective. They've also been reaching out to colleges and universities to understand kind of what is it that they can do that can make the difference. Some of the things that they've been looking at so far is providing support around signposting, and also kind of trying to build up that information about what may be needed for the long term. And they should be releasing a bit more information about the next steps and their plans in the next kind of couple of weeks. Next one, there's another kind of cross-party working group. So this is looking at cross-party, I should say cross-departmental. So cross-departmental working group looking at support from Department for Education, DHSE, so it's led by Nadine Dorries and Penny Mordaunt, and it's looking at the whole age groups. It's not just looking at children and young people. And this is where some of the announcement came out around the investment into some additional investment into mental health support teams. So mental health support teams will now be reaching 40 to 45% of places by 23-24, which is kind of quite a big leap from the previous areas of looking at about 20 to 25% of the areas. There was also announced as part of this cross-departmental working group some investment into community health services and increasing access to eating disorders as well, kind of in reaction and in response to some of the challenges that we'd seen in those services. Education recovery, it's been quite a hot topic over the last kind of couple of weeks, but there's been some investment into schools to help them with that, helping children and young people return to education as well. I've included the LINK programme because it's not a kind of a COVID-19 specific response, but it's something that the government and the Department for Education are really keen to encourage local councils to support their schools to sign up for. So it's very much looking at supporting schools with understanding the landscape that is out there in terms of mental health, and it's run by Anna Freud Centre, I think reflecting on some of the challenges for schools to understand the range of services that are out there and how the referral system works and what they can do to support children and young people. So moving on, kind of looking kind of at the council level, I think very clear that councils have so many responsibilities in terms of supporting children and young people in their mental health. This is ranging kind of from very basic elements, as kind of maybe not too basic, but such as providing green space, parks. There's evidence out there about the importance of these, leisure and cultural facilities, youth services. I can't really believe in youth services, I've got it on there twice, but to moving to kind of support for children in acute settings, working really closely with CCG and CAMS providers, support for children and young, for children in care, for example, as well. I think it's, again, really reflecting on the role that councils have in being very much a facilitator and having that role as local leaders, that they can really bring together education, NHS partners. So they have a really integral role in bringing everyone together to challenge it. And I think as the previous presentation noted, that role in terms of supporting education is essential to provide some of that early intervention and that initial response, and make sure schools and colleagues there feel upskilled to respond to children and young people with mental health needs. So moving on to some of the things that we're looking at in the LGA in terms of mental health, I think kind of noting that COVID-19 is been a significant challenge for everyone, but was also kind of very much impacting on children and young people's mental health, and we need to think about responding to that over the long term. So what do we want kind of ongoing policies to look at in terms of supporting that? We talked all the discussions in the previous presentation about those kind of ad hoc funding, which can provide real challenges for colleagues on the ground. So it's a case we continually make to government, and will continue to make it into this year's spending review, about needing long-term sustainable funding to support children and young people's mental health. Talked about the cross-government working group on mental health. Will continue to feed into that and raise the importance of the role that councils have in supporting children and young people. And coming back to the point around education recovery and the funding that has been announced so far, and I think we're also really keen to make the case that it's not just around that kind of educational academic catch-up. It's also very much around those services that support schools and go around them, importance of children and young people's socialisation, communication, and mental health and well-being. And for us, we work closely with our workforce colleagues at the LGA, and they also raising kind of concerns that they're hearing from teachers about the impact this has had on them over the last 15 months or so. And we really need to make sure we're able to support staff in doing this, particularly in schools, but also in other partner agencies. And also understanding what is out there for children who aren't in schools. We know that there's been an increase in children that are educated at home, electively home educated, so making sure that there's support there for them as well, which is really important. So moving on to some of the LGA campaigns, kind of children and young people's mental health. Children and young people has been a real priority for us, and we've run a range of campaigns trying to highlight some of the challenges that local councils experience in providing support to them. So in 2017, we had the Bright Futures campaign, which highlighted the lack of investment and spend in services, which included obviously children's services, so social care side of things, mental health and special educational needs and disabilities. And last year, we published our child-centred recovery document, which continues to guide our work at the moment, really looking at how we can make children and young people central to our COVID-19 recovery. really highlighting that there needs to be holistic investment into services and not just single out kind of one aspect of children's, kind of the services that go into children's to support that. So there's some kind of key asks we're making as part of that campaign, our child-centred recovery, and that's asking for a cross-Whitehall strategy that puts children and young people at the heart of recovery, investment into the local safety nets and the universal and early help services, including mental health and wellbeing services to support children and young people and their families during the pandemic and following it, and some dedicated action to prevent the attainment gap from widening, including immediate work to stabilise the early years sector and support children and young people to attend school. And through these campaigns, we also continue to make the argument about some of the challenges that local authorities have with their finances. And this includes the kind of asking for the 1.7 billion early intervention grant to be restored, and the 700 million that's been removed from the public health grant to also be reinvested. So kind of in addition to that, we've made some kind of targeted responses around the work that was announced from the mental health work that the government's been doing. I think kind of the investment into the mental health support teams in schools and the sped up rollout of this is really great, but we are still aware that there are some parts of the country that aren't going to be benefiting from this as soon as we'd want it to be. School counsellors is something that we continue to hear would be beneficial to our colleagues, providing that dedicated support alongside mental health support teams in schools. That education recovery, really making that case for importance of children and young people's mental health alongside it in their socialisation. And we've done a lot of work recently, or in the kind of the last year or so, about the importance of space and housing and the impact that can have on children and young people and their mental health, and also adults as well in the community. And also looking at the role of public health, as noted, that kind of importance around wider factors. I'm sure everyone's aware of the introduction of ICSs. I think there are 5 in London at the moment, so I assume Ealing may be part of one at the moment, and government is kind of rolling out some of the information and the guidance around that, and we really want to make sure that children and young people are front and centre of that as much as possible, and that councils are a real core partner in that. So moving on to some of the good practice, I'm aware of time, so I'll rush through these last bits. And it's also all available on our website, so I can send you the link afterwards if that would be helpful. So we've done a range of work recently, so one of the areas looking at whole household approaches to mental health, looking at how family and kind of other carers can support children and young children if they have mental health problems, the impact of child's mental health problem on the rest of the family. We've been doing some work looking at that transitions point. So as a child is getting near to 18, if they're leaving child and adolescent mental health services and being referred into adult mental health services, how kind of the best way to make that as seamless as possible. But if they're being referred out of CAMS into kind of wider community support, what's the best way to look at that? And we also did some work to collect information from colleagues during COVID-19 to understand how they'd changed their mental health support, what different things they'd been doing, trying to really celebrate the work that councils were still doing throughout COVID-19 to support children and young people with their mental health. We had kind of some really good practice around the use of digital services, but also people going for walks and the benefits that they had as well. We have different research reports as well, which may be of use to colleagues, which can all be found on our website, looking at developing strong partnerships to mental health support. We also run peer learning programs at the LGA, and a couple of years ago we did one at looking specifically around mental health, where partners went to different councils went to share what was going on for them and what was working in particular ways. So kind of a couple of specific examples that I've pulled out from some of our recent research. Some work that was being going on in Durham, and really looking at that parental support and the impact that kind of the role that parents can have if a child has mental health needs and the impact it can have on them. So this is quite a really interesting one, because it was quite an organic group that was set up. It was set up by a parent carer, and it was not until more recent that it started to receive some additional funding from the council and the CCG, because they started to really see the benefit and the impact that it was having. There is some public health funding that went into it, and the CCG I think now is kind of the main funder around it. So it's really looking at how to support parents, the roles that they have in supporting each other. Parents, giving the opportunities to parents to self-refer to this group, and providing that safe place for them to come together. So, I think it was Lisa that was mentioning that there was some parenting programs that have some really good practice as well. So we have, alongside of this example of the rollercoaster family support, we also have an example of Wandsworth Council, where they have a network of parenting support as well, which is in the same report that this rollercoaster family support one is as well. And then the next one that I had to share is looking at the Mental Wealth Academy in Oxfordshire. So it's again kind of really looking at that transition point and that support for children and young people at that time. It's been initially funded by the Department for Health and Social Care for 3 years, but it's really positively supported by the CCG and the council. It's quite a new one, but I think it kind of colleagues that I was speaking to there have found that it's had some really positive impact already. This one also provides some support to parents to understand how they can support children and young people. And it also uses a model of having service user ambassadors. So where there's been children and young people who've come through the service before, they provide their lived experience and provide youth groups to support other children and young people. The provider itself had been closely involved with the CAMS system, so it had quite a lot of experience of working in the mental health world, but it then used this expertise to develop a relationship with 6 different charities, all who have different kind of areas of expertise, such as special educational needs and disabilities, to really try and support as many children and young people as they could through this sort of different model. And they have, again, quite a flexible model where it's the number of kind of sessions that a young person have can be quite flexible, responding to that need. So that is the end of what I was going to share today. I think it has been a bit of a quick run through, but I will make sure I share any links with Harjit, especially for our report that will showcase those case studies as well.
Great, thanks very much indeed, Flora. I'll let members put their hands up if they want to ask questions. One thing I would like to ask is, if we were thinking about doing a visit to another local authority, do you think Durham or Oxfordshire, because of those particular programs, or is there another council which maybe has a different approach to some of the areas that we've talked about that we might be able to learn from?
I think that's a really good question. I think it kind of depends what sort of thing you're looking at. If it's you're wanting to kind of develop a parenting program or something like that with some really good areas, or if it's looking at some wider mental health support and the roles for councils, there's some kind of really interesting work. I want to say it's going on in Birmingham that they're doing with their schools and with children who were acting as those kind of service ambassadors as well. So there's definitely kind of a whole real mix of different councils that are doing some really interesting things. So I think if you know what you want to look at, or if it's just get a bit of a taster, you might be able to get some of those ideas from some of the case study documents that I can share.
Great, thanks very much. And yeah, I mean, the other thing that I was just wondering, the program, right at the start, the program for 4-week waiting times. I think you're saying that's only happening in a few areas. I mean, is that's presumably that was established some time ago, and it's not something. It's too late for Ealing to bid for that, is it? Because I mean, certainly we heard in the presentation earlier on that a lot of difficulties are caused by the long waiting lists to access CAMS and other services.
Yeah, so it was set up at least a couple of years ago now. I think they're still waiting to see the output of kind of what works for those areas. I want to say the Department for Education kind of used some data and directly approached some places, but I was about to say don't record me on that, but I need to double check.
Right.
But it's a couple of years old, so I think that's kind of just one part of it at the moment.
Okay, thanks. I saw Lisa put your hand up. Was that in relation to that point?
Yeah, it was. It's just to say that, so the 4-week wait pilot was rolled out with the initial Trailblazer, so that's the first time MHSTs came into being. It's interesting. I think there was only about 3 sites in London that were chosen, and they're all still working on that. And I mean, I've had lots of dealings with Camden, who was one of the sort of piloting areas, and that has been incredibly difficult for them to deliver on. And I think you're right, absolutely, Flora. They're still kind of collating that data and thinking about next steps. But I think the challenge was so huge that I think even the areas when they thought that they were chosen for all the reasons they were chosen, haven't been able to pull it off, because it's not actually realistic or possible, which is probably why we haven't heard so much. But that's only my view, but I think that's what you gather from the ground, and certainly talking to other people who are project managers in these things, that seems to be the issue. It just proves how challenging this entire area is.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. Yeah, so perhaps not as good as it sounds. Yes, so I was just going to turn to you. Yes, Councillor.
Very, very quickly, I don't want to delay us. What exactly did that entail, the 4 week? Was that, say, from the moment the teacher started thinking that child might be having some sort of issue, and then actually seeing a counsellor within 4 weeks? What did that 4 weeks describe exactly?
So I believe, and I'm sure Lisa will come in if she knows more than me, but I believe it was from kind of initial referral to treatment, which kind of, I think, shows why it is such a challenge to get there, because it goes through that initial kind of referral kind of screening for needs straight to treatment, which is a lot to do in 4 weeks.
Yeah.
So what would be a more sort of realistic time frame?
I think that's the issue. I don't think anyone's really settled on that, and I think that Laura is absolutely right. But it wasn't really to do with schools. It was about more to do with general referrals that predominantly have come from GPs and were going into CAMS. So it was sort of going into CAMS at tier 2, and then basically the assessment. And I think what people were finding was they could do the assessment. That's not the issue. They could meet the 4 week wait within assessment, but the gap between assessment and intervention was the bit that they were finding incredibly difficult to close. So in answer to your question, I think that is, at the moment, I don't think anyone has really come up with an evidence-based view on what would be reasonable and what the standard that should be set moving forward yet.
No, I agree. I think, nationally, I think waiting times continue to be a real big challenge.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks very much. So, if there aren't any more questions, so I mean, I think the clock beat us slightly. I think possibly there would have been more questions if I'd have gone on to your report earlier. So sorry about that, Flora. But thank you very much to Flora. And obviously, thank you very much to the Ealing officers who are still on. That's the end of So Carla, is that a legacy hand, or did you want to come back?
Sorry, legacy.
Good. Okay. Great. And I see Lisa's comment in the chat. Yeah. So the only item left on the agenda is the date of next meeting, which will be the 28th of September, which will also be by Zoom. So thank you very much indeed for everyone presenting and attending tonight. Thank you.
Good.
And we can good night.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you, Chair.